Initially, a decision taken by the commander of the Israeli Military Central Command, a certain Ehud Barak, in May-June 1986. This is what he said at the time.
I want a unit whose people look like Arabs, talk like Arabs, and ride bikes in the Nablus Kasbah as if they were on Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv.
Within a few months, the Duvdevan unit took shape. With a creed from the Bible, it is through cunning that you will wage war. A war in the shadows, which the Israeli army did not want to bring to light. Here are press clippings from the time. Censorship to press charges against Reuters. IDF denies information on Duvdevan unit. ABC, the unit really exists. Steven Weisman, a journalist from Reuters who revealed the existence of the Duvdevan unit, is accused of having transmitted secret information to his employer. Duvdevan unit shoot from a minibus. The army denies and seizes the journalist's visual documents. Armed people disguised as tourists shot at stone throwers. In these exclusive photos, the first Duvdevan in action. Some are still active within the unit's reservists, and others in special units. That's why we blurred their faces. The IDF uses a special unit in the West Bank which has obtained the right to kill.
It's like watching a child grow up. You find an experienced man, almost 37 years old, a child who continues to improve. It is a real source of pride. Most of its activity is not known to the public in Israel. Since its creation, I can say that the lives of thousands of people have been saved thanks to particularly creative and innovative operations.
A secret targeted elimination unit, Duvdevan, operates against the leaders of the Intifada. Nearly 40 years after the creation of Duvdevan, according to Uri Bar-Lev, the unit remains one of the most effective in the fight against terrorism in urban areas.
So that's the background. Now, I-24 News' Matthias Inbar brings us an up-close look at the Duvdevan unit.
With us, Barak Chikotai. He was a Duvdevan soldier, an officer during the reserve duty. Today, author of this book, Write on the Water. Why now? And why write this kind of story?
First of all, it's something that comes to me from within. It's like self-therapy. The book also speaks a lot about my experience, the experiences of my team, which is why it has been subjected to censorship for 6 months. As I told you, it was completely dissected. Every word was examined before being authorized. They eliminated a large number of chapters. They asked that we add this, that we delete that. This book tells what we experienced. Then it talks a lot about the psychological side, reactions following combat, post-traumatic stress disorder. I personally support some of the soldiers suffering from PTSD as part of the Duvdevan Unit alumni program.
I have the feeling that this book is a kind of remedy for you.
I believe that it has succeeded in being both a cure, but it's also a preventative remedy. I believe that we are all in the same psychological boat today, after what we have experienced. But very often we don't understand to what extent the fighters also pay a psychological price, in addition to the physical one. It is important to focus on this topic as well. It's true that this should not prevent them from fighting. We must defend this country, do everything possible for that. But we also must understand that just as there are bodily injuries, there are psychological injuries, and none of them take precedence over the other. This is a first point. The second thing that interests us, I think, is the result. Israeli soldiers got their hands on this or that person. They won victories. They eliminated such and such person. And that's very good. But what I wanted to show is how we got all this, the process, how it happens from the beginning. There are people, there are feelings, there are fears. The fighters have to face fears, they overcome them. But what I describe in this book is how this mechanic works, down to the smallest details, regardless of outcome. The result is important, of course, but I wanted the public to understand what the fighters go through, their feelings, the emotions, the training. How does it unfold? The thoughts. How do we establish a plan of attack? If it works, if it doesn't work. their permissions, to have an overview of the whole system, immerse them in the heart of this unit.
If you had one example who could bring our viewers to read the book.
We were inserted into one of the villages near Jenin, in the north of the West Bank. Me and my assistant, we were in the middle of an operation. I'm not going into detail because I can't. And all of a sudden, we were spotted, discovered. It was like an episode of Fauda. The shots were flying. It was truly a miracle that we got through it. When we did the debriefing, we tried to understand why. Everything worked well. Our weapons were not visible. Nothing special happened. But I remembered that my deputy was eating gum. It was in the middle of Ramadan, like now. During Ramadan, even among Arabs, there are people who do not fast, but they don't do it in full public view. You see, that smallest detail is important. The simple fact that he was eating gum. He didn't say a word. He didn't do anything in particular. He didn't do anything that would arouse suspicion, and yet, I'll give you another example. We were in a village near Nablus, me and my deputy. It was also during an infiltration to get hold of a wanted terrorist. We were asked to wait a few minutes before operating, for intelligence purposes. When you're somewhere and there's nothing to do, you have to keep busy. So we said to ourselves, let's buy an ice cream. We go into a store, we buy ice cream. Everything obviously happens in Arabic, as any Arab would do since we're supposed to be Arab. And I see that my friend, an Ashkenazi from Ramat Sharon, is holding his ice cream in one hand, eating it, and in the other hand, he's holding the wrapper. I said to him, what are you doing? He replies, I'm looking for a trash can. A trash can? We're in a small village near Nablus, and you're looking for a trash can? Throw it. He kept the packaging in his hand, as is done in Ramat Sharon when finding a trash can. But when you're in their village, you have to throw it on the ground. This is how they behave. You can also be an Arab woman. So at the bus stop, we won't sit like this, but like this. We have to remember that you are a woman. If we disguise ourselves as a woman in Ramallah, in Jenin, or Hebron, it will not be the same woman. In Hebron, the woman will be more religious, more pious. She covers her head. She wears less makeup. In Ramallah, she is more modern. She smokes, she eats chewing gum. She looks around.
I have a question. Write on the water. This water can extinguish the fire. Maybe this is the idea?
There's an Arab singer, Feiruz, Lebanese, a fantastic singer. In one of her songs, she compares the man to letters written on water. What does she mean by that? If you're in a swimming pool and you do like that, the water moves. There's a movement, but in a second, everything goes back to the way it was before. For example, let's say we eliminated the Hamas #1 in Hebron. We eliminated him. A week later, the Shin Bet tells us there's a new #1. But we have just eliminated his former boss. We're constantly trying to create a situation in which we influence reality. It's a dissonance that we find among soldiers, particularly this type of unit, where it involves very precise operations. Listen, if we take Duvdevan as an example, it's not a unit that operates blindly. Our job is to get our hands on certain persons, and it could be in their bedroom, at the hairdresser, in their store, and we take them out. We see this very often on TV.
But what Duvdevan exactly did on 7th October and later on?
I believe the unit has experienced a significant number of casualties because it's always on the front lines. And being on the front lines means we are the first to be affected. When there's an exchange of fire, the soldiers intervene to save as many people as possible, without asking any questions. And this is why we have, unfortunately, a large number of losses, injuries, deaths. I personally accompany families who have lost loved ones or injured people everywhere in the country during their rehabilitation in various hospitals, at Mount Scopus and Sheba, at home. We are all sensitive to bodily injuries. If we see someone with or without crutches, we understand that they've been injured. But I think we need to be much more sensitive. There's a person I have been supporting for many years who suffers from PTSD. We are at the license office because he needs authorization from psychiatrists, etc. It's very complicated. We get there and the line is endless. He tells me, I have a card that exempts me from waiting in line. I am an IDF invalid, but it's a psychological disorder, so it's embarrassing to... So he goes to find the attendant, discreetly shows her his card, puts it back in his pocket. She takes care of him. Everyone is shouting, "What are you doing? You're ahead of everyone." Physically, he looks like everyone else, so people have difficulty accepting. He looks like me and says, "I would have preferred to take a bullet. So it would have been better to take a bullet, appear handicapped, and be understood by people." One more thing. This makes me think of another wounded man. When he was at Sha'ari Tzedek Hospital, a soldier who lost his leg. We left the service. He went to have a coffee outside. He was in a wheelchair and people were applauding him, thanking him, telling him he was a hero because they saw this young man was missing a leg. And I believe there's an imbalance between the recognition, the honor that we give to those who have been physically injured and those who have been psychologically injured. I hope the book bridges that gap somewhat.
And in the same time, I have in mind this soldier who fought during the 7 October attacks, and then he was missioned to Judea and Samaria area to fight against terror. He now smokes and drinks. He knows it is forbidden to do so. But how can you, with all your experience, tell him to stop?
You raise a very important question there. A soldier, in addition to having to shoot well, run fast, be strong, must also be strong internally, psychologically, mentally. The IDF attaches particular importance to this today. Learning to have psychological resilience, how to prevent the event, how to work on a combat experience. As demobilization approaches, there are a whole bunch of workshops. When something happens, we stop everything and we take care of the soldiers. We ask them how they feel, and in most cases, this has a preventative effect. The percentage of people suffering from PTSD or people who indulge in drinking or otherwise is relatively low. It exists, but listen, you take a young man of 18, a good boy who has never experienced violence, and a year later he is told, take a gun and shoot people at point-blank range. It's completely crazy, isn't it? But it is the only solution we have. This is how we get our hands on wanted people. They are trying to kill us. We must understand that there are people who pay the price. As a society, as an army, we must do everything to have people with a strong mind and resilience. Most fighters come out of these events unscathed. They are strong, mentally and physically.
The 7 October attacks were a failure, but it was also the occasion for the soldiers, aged of 20, 30, 40, even 50 years old, to save the country.
On October 7th, you saw how people responded. Individuals, true heroes, who are on their own initiative, took their weapons and went directly to the scene of fighting. As far as the army is concerned, there are a lot of things that need to be done differently. The hit we took was enormous. We can't look away. But it helps us discover the heroism of young people. They are real lions. Yesterday, I was in Kfar Aza with a wounded man, and he introduced me to the family he saved. It was very moving. I believe we have an excellent army. What needs to be corrected, we will correct. But the fighters themselves, the soldiers, they are the real heroes, each of them. Unfortunately, sometimes the system fails. On Yom Kippur, those who saved the situation were the soldiers themselves. The price was extremely heavy. People came back from abroad. I know one injured person, the one who lost his leg. He came back from Japan. He hadn't even been called up. He paid thousands of shekels to return quickly. I know someone who was in Europe on vacation with his family, and he's a deputy battalion chief. He learned what happened, and when he wanted to board the plane, he was told that there were no seats available. He went to find the pilot and told him, "I'm a deputy battalion commander. I absolutely have to come back." He made the entire trip sitting in the jump seat reserved for the crew with a harness. Do you see how far this goes? Take Russia, for example. Russia has been at war with Ukraine for several years, 2 or 3 years, and people are leaving Russia. They do everything to escape, by any means possible. They falsify their age to avoid the army. In Israel, people do everything to come. All my children's friends have returned from abroad, all the reservists. It's fantastic. Listen, I'm really optimistic once again. We will change what needs to be changed. But I am optimistic because the young generation is extraordinary, and I believe these people still have great things to do. And with God's help, I hope we win, and I'm sure everything will be fine.
Thanks so